Let's take a trip back to the 1980s, a decade known for housing some of the most iconic cars of all time. You have Ferrari sitting atop of its throne as being the pinnacle of all things automotive. Cars such as the 328, the F40, the Testarossa. Cars that when you think of Ferrari to this day, you're probably thinking of those three. Most iconic, beautiful cars of all time. And then you have BMW, who has debuted its motorsport division, releasing cars such as the E28 M5 and then the E30 M3, who at this point in time is engraving itself into the history books of DTM legendary status, winning races all over, and to this day we consider the E30 M3 the largest winning DTM car of all time. The 1980s were without a doubt the glory decade for both of these brands. However, the turn of the decade is approaching and it's time to release their newest cars. In 1988 and 1989 respectively, we were introduced to the E34 M5 and the Ferrari 348 TS. See, now Ferraris are exotic sports cars. Flashy, fast, raw, not very practical, and everyone is sure to be staring at you as you drive by. But now BMW, on the other hand, was interested in these things called Super Saloons. Understated, refined, comfortable, gentleman-like cars that not everyone is going to be staring at as you drive by. However, like a Ferrari, and this is where the Super Saloon comes in, because this was meant to compete with something like that. They are fast, raw, exhilarating, and great handling cars. And that's why these two things are so iconic to pair together. Because you have a 90s Super Saloon paired up to a 90s exotic sports car. And I think you'd be surprised at just how impressive a car like this really is. Because of these surface level differences between these cars, the buyer of the M5 and the buyer of the Ferrari were probably two very different people. But fast forward to today, and the collector car market desires both of these cars, and that's why we're going to put them head to head. What we're going to do is basically compare these cars from everything from the exterior, the interior, the driving dynamic of both the cars, the specs, and then we're going to put them head to head and see which one prevails, the exotic sports car or the understated saloon. Before we get into the specs between the 348 and the M5, let's take a look at what reviewers back in the 90s thought of these two cars. So initial reviews of the E34 M5 stated things like, BMW's new generation M5 might just be the best car in the world. It labeled the S38 as a crown jewel of a power plant and hard to find flaws with it. Car and Driver stated that the E34 M5 at the time was the quickest, fastest, regular production four-door ever tested. And now some words discussing the 348. Initial reviews labeled it as a bit of a dinosaur. Harsher, bulkier, more finicky, and underwhelming, especially comparing it to the NSX at the time. It's no quicker than cars costing a third as much, said Car and Driver. So these two cars got kind of different publicity at the time. Now, of course, there was good things to say about the Ferrari, basically saying that it's a direct, very fun car, and the steering is some of the best people have ever experienced. And the M5 didn't really have any negatives. Overall, the Ferrari wasn't really well received like the M5 was. Of course, there was good things to be said about it, mainly touching on the fact that the steering was some of the best people have ever experienced. It's a good benchmark for the brand. It's fun, it's raw, and it's quick. But otherwise, there was kind of a lot of negative, whereas the M5, people were having a hard time finding problems with it. It was that good. Now you have to think about the fact that the 348 came from a brand with heritage in racing since the 1950s. I mean, cars like the F40, the Testarossa, the 328, these were very widely loved cars since day one. And to this day, we still love them, and that's for a reason. Whereas the BMW M5, on the other hand, didn't really have to live up to any super stellar predecessors, kind of like the 348. Yes, there was the E28 M5, which was widely loved because it was new. It was the first time we really saw super saloons become a thing. And this was supposed to be its better, upgraded little brother. So there's not much to hate about it. Plus, it had the publicity of having the engine derived specifically from the M1 Pro car, a beloved race car from the 70s. So it's kind of hard to hate putting a racing heritage engine into a four-door super saloon. Now with those reviews in mind, let's go ahead and read through the actual specs between the two cars. I think this will shed some light on why these cars received the reviews that they received. It'll also show you how similar they really are despite having absolutely no visual similarities. So the M5 and the 348 would both produce basically the same exact time. The M5 maybe a little earlier from 88 to 95, whereas the 348 came in more so in 89 and ran till about 94. But basically I want to compare these because they're the same exact production era car. It's not like they're, 5-10 years apart. They were made the exact same time. A big one here is obviously the MSRP. The E34 M5 came in at a starting MSRP of about $58,000, whereas the 348 itself came in at a whopping $95,000 starting in 1989. And that price went up as the model year progressed and changes occurred with the car. The rarity between the two cars, the M5 had about 12,254 units produced, a pretty low production number car, and then the Ferrari was 8,844 units, so even more rare. The first generation E34 M5 with the 3.6 liter S38 made 311 horsepower and 266 foot-pounds of torque. The Ferrari makes 296 horsepower at 7,200 RPM and 238 foot-pounds of torque. The later B38 made 335 horsepower, and the later version of the 348 made 312 horsepower. So on paper, the M5 is kind of a faster car, or at least it should be. The 0 to 60 times for the M5 with the 3.6 were 5.6 seconds. The later 3.8 was 4.9 seconds. The Ferrari, 5.3 seconds. And this is where understated Super Saloon really starts to come to fruition, because on paper, it's actually a quicker car. One of the more surprising things between the two cars, considering that the E34 absolutely dwarfs the 348, is actually the weight. The E34 comes in at about 3,600 to 3,800 pounds in the M5 trim. The 348, on the other hand, 3,300 pounds. A lot of people think that this car probably weighs 2,500 pounds. Despite its size, it actually weighs a lot. A non-M 525 E34 is about 3,300 pounds, so they almost weigh the same. I don't know where all the weight comes from with the 348, but somehow it's there. So the E34 M5 is give or take about a foot longer than the 348, about a foot taller than the 348, and it's actually thinner than the 348. Kind of makes sense. I mean, Ferraris, low, wide, short, small little cars. The M5 actually kind of dwarfs it. When they're side by side from a certain angle, you can't even see the 348 next to the M5. The final drive on the M5 was 3.73, and on the 348, 3.53. The transmission for the M5 was a standard 5-speed shift. The 348 is a dogleg 5-speed. Our first point of comparison being the exteriors. As I said earlier, there's really nothing similar about them. For two cars made in the exact same period of time, they really don't look from the same decade. The M5 was basically BMW's first attempt towards like contemporary modernism in a way. They got rid of the oldness of the E28 and the E12, the chrome bumpers, the chrome all over the place. It didn't really have a similar styling like those two cars. It really was a jump forward in the terms of like a modern looking car. Whereas Ferrari, on the other hand, seems to have been clinging on to their 1980s lineage. I mean, this in my mind is not a 90s car, this is an 80s car. You have the side strakes, the rear grating, pop-up headlights, the vented engine cover. I mean, the Targa top, you could pull the roof off and you have your hair blowing in the wind. In my mind, the 348 is a super 80s car, whereas this looks to have jumped forward into the 90s. Remember earlier when I said understatement? I mean, look at it. This is basically a car that if you don't know what it is, you'd walk right by it and think, oh, it's just a standard family 4-door saloon, right? There's no striking features. There's nothing that sticks out to you as this has a mean engine or this is a fast car or anything like that. And that's the beauty of, in my mind, the M5. The fact that you have something so practical looking, so large and spacious, which we'll get to when we get to the inside, but something that's just understated, and there's nothing wrong with being understated. You can get from point A to point B without everyone kind of staring at you, without everyone wanting to take pictures of your car, and that is the beauty of the understatement of an M5, based off of a standard 5 Series, which is just a 4-door saloon for the 90s businessman to get from point A to point B to work and home and have enough room to put the family in on the weekends. That is what the E34 is, and the M5 takes that and makes it even cooler. But then this Ferrari, flashy, everyone's gonna be looking at you. The sound, the appearance, I mean, I'm sure in the 80s this thing was a drop dead stunner. and today it's also a drop dead stunner. It's just a beautiful, beautiful car. This is nothing but aggressiveness. You know, you have basically your hidden door handle, right? You have a button, exotic sports car, not your everyday car. No one's getting in this thing and saying, yeah, I'm gonna take it to my corporate job 9 to 5 every day. That's not really the vibe of this car. Despite the exteriors being super different, there's two things that are pretty similar in my mind. First one, the beautiful factory wheels. Both of these cars have drop-dead gorgeous factory wheels. You have the throwing stars and then these classic Ferrari. They actually look kind of similar. I mean, they're both 5-spoke, super 90s, and they're both just really good-looking wheels. And the second thing, and you could probably guess what that's gonna be, you have a clamshell on the E34 and a clamshell on the Ferrari. I guess hood's not the right way to put it because this is technically a frunk, but either way, the styling is the same. Forward opening front ends, which I love. I think they're super cool. Before we start on the interiors, let's just do a quick little test of getting in the car. The M5, you get in it like a normal car. Easy peasy, no problem. And now, come over to the Ferrari. Okay, you gotta squeeze yourself over a huge door sill. You gotta kind of shape shift yourself to avoid the bolster and the wheel at the same time. Then you have to drag your leg all the way up and over, and you're in. Now, I'm a young guy, and this is not an easy car to get into at all. And I understand why the bolsters wear so much on this seat, because you really have to throw yourself all over the bolster to get into it. It is not easy. The door doesn't open that far outward, so you kind of have to crawl in this awkward manner, and it kind of sucks, to be honest. Like I said, I'm young, and it's still not really that practical at all. So that's another thing on the Ferrari practicality board that obviously doesn't matter because it's a Ferrari. But once you're in the Ferrari, well, how does it feel? Well, space-wise, I mean, it's a tight car. It's a two-door car, no back seats. I mean, you feel this sense of width, but you don't really feel anything beyond that. I mean, the rear shelf is right there. The seat really only goes far back enough to allow maybe someone that's like 6'2" to drive it semi-comfortably. Your steering wheel doesn't tilt, doesn't move. But you know, you don't feel claustrophobic. It feels nice, but it's definitely not a family car. The comfort of the seat itself. I'm a small dude. I'm not overweight. I weigh like 160-ish. And this is a very tight seat on me. So I cannot imagine people much bigger comfortably sitting in this car, because this seat, it hugs you. And that's a good thing, because when you want to drive sporty, you want to be nice and snug. I will say it's not overly comfortable. The seat kind of concaves your back into a slouch for some reason. The inner part of the rear seat is just super kind of recessed. So you're kind of driving hunched over, which after a little bit does kind of bother your back. Not the most comfortable seat I've ever sat in, but it's definitely sporty. Headrest is pretty much worthless. It's just got this super soft headrest that doesn't really do anything for you, and it's too far back to comfortably rest your head on. So the headrest is a bit of a dud. Overall, seats aren't horrible. Driving position, your wheels are right here, so your feet are kind of cantered inward. I guess that's the whole monocoque car thing. Again, race car feel, but kind of a weird driving feel. Like everything you're doing is to the right here. I'm sorry if I said to the left, because your dead pedal is where typically like a clutch pedal would be on a different car. So it takes a bit getting used to. The pedal setup is a bit funny. You know, you need to have kind of small shoes to drive it properly, because the brake pedal and the gas pedal are super close. You would think it was good for heel towing, but it's really kind of not. It's pretty tricky to get the hang of. The cluster steering wheel interface, drop dead gorgeous. The likely Momo made wheel 3-spoke is absolutely beautiful. The clusters with the orange accents and the orange backlighting, absolutely beautiful. I absolutely love the interface of this car. Now, the build quality and overall feel of the interior. The Italian leather on this car that's wrapped everywhere from basically dash down is really nice. You know, it wraps the doors, the e-brake kind of trim area. The seats, the glove box, your radio thing, the stitching's beautiful, it looks beautiful, the quality is really nice, it's soft, it's supple. But then you get over here to the kind of the dash area, and it seems more so like this pleather, fake leather that kind of wraps everything, and it seems a bit tacky, it feels a bit cheap. The plastic vents are kind of atrocious. I mean, they are super kind of just, they're just not very nice. The center console area, the gated shifter feels amazing. Of course, the gated is one of Ferrari's just token items. It's amazing. Otherwise, you know, you have gauges here in the middle, which are really cool, but your buttons are all pretty underwhelming. I know these get like the sticky button syndrome. The plastics kind of suck. It's just kind of a very monotone center, which is fine because you're not buying this car for practicality or anything like that. So these are more of an afterthought, but they don't stick out to me as like being really beautiful or elegant or whatever. They seem a little cheapish, I will say. And now the E34 interior. So first off, this is a right-hand drive car, as you're probably noticing, and I have the special Hurricane Alcantara interior. So now the Ferrari comes with basically the name is slipping me, but you have the Ferrari tan, I think you have black. I don't really think there's any interior options beyond that. Certainly nothing special. The M5, again, is usually just a light silver interior, maybe a black interior, but you could also get special things like M Hurricane. And these special items like this that you can add to the car make it so absolutely cool and special. It's like a creative look on just like a business class car, and I really like that. Now, first things first, as we start with the Ferrari, these seats. These are the sports seats in this car, so they are nice and firm, but not quite Ferrari firm, meaning I have plenty of room to kind of shift around. They're not as tight, but I think they're the perfect middle ground. Like, they are perfect sportiness, perfect comfort. Headrest is actually firm, can hold up your head. The steering wheel gauge interface. Now, this is where the M5 kind of loses. The steering wheel on these later M5s, just boring, just old. I mean, it's an ugly airbag 4-spoke. The Ferrari, you have a non-airbag, beautiful 3-spoke that feels like a race car. This, to me, is just a pretty boring, large steering wheel. I'm not really a huge fan of it. The M stripes that are in it are pretty sweet, but I think the M5 definitely loses in the terms of the steering wheel. Cluster, standard E34 cluster, except you have an M on it. You have 180 miles per hour on the dash versus 200 on the Ferrari. The M adds a nice little sportiness to the cluster, but overall it's a very generic, general cluster, the same as all the E34s, so it's nothing really stellar. But I will say I absolutely love the cluster design on the E34. It's very, very nice. The materials used, again, like I said, I have these special suede cloth seats, which are just absolutely awesome. Typically you would get leather, great material leather. The dashboard is kind of this tumbled leather look, but it's not actually leather. I honestly prefer it to the 348. The 348's kind of got that shiny, tacky, like leather laid over the dashboard, whereas this is like the material of the dash itself. It doesn't look like an overlay. It doesn't look like anything like that. Coming down the center console, it's all kind of, I don't know what you would call it. It's kind of like a vinyl, but it looks leather. The door cards are the same. This isn't any extended leather in this car. There's many different options for E34s, so some might have it, some might not. Overall, this is a pretty standard feeling E34 interior, which looks wise, I love it. I think the interior styling is great. The center console canters towards you, which it doesn't even do in the Ferrari, which is kind of interesting. So it directs it at the driver, right? And it's like, it's a driver oriented car. You have the leather shifts around, leather e-brake, standard leather, nice. My shifts around here is a little bit stretched, but typically it would be leather. Overall, the general interior of this car, your light switches, your climate controls, kind of everything, window switches, everything feels a little bit nicer, a little more well put together, a little more solid. It doesn't feel quite as race cars like the Ferrari. And I feel like, honestly, Ferrari build quality kind of comes down to the fact of like, so what, it's a Ferrari, you know? Whereas like BMW, especially in their 5 Series lineup and their M5 lineup, they have to meet the expectations of the buyers, and that is, it better be a luxury car. I want it to feel like a luxury car on the inside, and the M5 does a very good job of feeling like a luxury car on the inside. So let's talk about trunk space on both of these cars. The trunk on the E34 is massive. I mean, what you would expect from a German family saloon. You could fit a ton of stuff back here. I think probably 3 golf bags. This is before BMW gave you the golf bag diagrams, but tons of space, not even mentioning the fact that you have a totally usable back seat. Undoubtedly, ton of stuff you could fit back here. Then you even have room underneath for a full-size spare. So that is really impressive. You got a huge trunk and a full-size spare, storage compartments on the side, and a toolkit. And then you have the 348 with its frunk. To its credit, I will say, it is a pretty spacious compartment. It goes down pretty deep, but obviously it's not very large. I mean, I don't think you can fit any golf bags in here, let alone anything of much use at all. We have our Ferrari Schedoni luggage toolkit right here. We have a tire inflator and a car cover, but otherwise, I mean, I put some stuff in here, but certainly not a very usable trunk. And of course, we have the power plants. E34 M5, you have a 3.6 or a 3.8 liter inline 6 engine. Then the Ferrari has the F119 V8, making 296 horsepower, flat plane crankshaft, dry sump. A big one here is reliability, maintenance costs. So neither of these cars are necessarily cheap cars to own, being an M car from the 90s and a Ferrari in general. I will say, M5, I've had 0 problems with. Ferrari, I had the alternator go bad on me. Right off the bat, that's a dock for the reliability of the Ferrari, though I will say it's been very good. Oil leak wise, both these engines are gonna leak. I mean, it's a Ferrari V8 and a BMW inline 6. They're both gonna leak, so you're not really gonna escape them. Best thing about the S38 compared to the Ferrari is the fact that the S38 has a timing chain and it's in the engine bay normally. So first off, you don't really have to service at all, but if you do have to do sort of services, everything can be done with the engine in the car. The wonderful 348, on the other hand, has an engine that needs to be removed from the car to do a timing belt every about 5 years or so. So you have a major service that you have to do every 5 years on the Ferrari, which is expensive and a lot of work. The S38, there's no reason you ever really need to remove the engine unless you blow it up or something in that manner. In terms of simplicity and DIY-ness, the Motronic engine setup on the Ferrari is really pretty dang similar to the BMW M5. They both use a lot of Bosch things. I think they're both using I think they might be the exact same Motronic setup. I don't quote me on that. The BMW, of course, has ITBs, which sound absolutely glorious in their own way, but the Ferrari has that flat plane crankshaft V8. For the driving portion of this video, I want to make it quick. If you guys want full in-depth videos of me driving both cars, you can check them out on my channel. But I want to go based off more so the just first impressions of the car. You know, you get in one, what are you going to feel like? So to help us keep the driving portions concise, I asked AI on Google, who was the M5 designed for? What is the experience people want out of an M5? And it says here, it was designed for people who want to enjoy a high-performance, sporty, and elegant vehicle with a refined interior. That's what the M5 is. So I would say that's actually pretty spot on, because what you have when you hop in the M5 is a car that under 4,000 RPMs feels like you're driving any other sedan kind of family cruising, daily driver. Nothing about this car in any way, shape, or form is aggressive, exotic, annoying, uncomfortable. The interior is absolutely beautiful. It's comfortable. There's no, there's no road noise, and it's just simple to drive. You get in it, and it's easy to drive. And I think that is the beauty of all things BMW, is that you can get in a BMW and you can drive it comfortably, especially an M5, or when you're tired of your comfort driving above 4,000 RPMs, you have an insanely fun, sporty, and impressive driving experience. I mean, this is like, it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing till $4 grand, and then you punch it and you're like, holy crap, you come in here into the corners and it just performs. I mean, you can whip it, rip it, and it feels like it's a sports car. I mean, the power is there, the handling is there. It is immensely fun to drive this car at its limit. And then when you're back in town, come down below $4,000, throw it in, the higher gear, and you're back to luxury, man. We could put the AC on, sound system, whatever. You could have 4 friends in the car with you, and you can do all those fun things and still, have a trunk full of stuff, a car full of people, and, get where you need to be. And that is what's so amazing about the E34, nonetheless, the E34 M5. Just a very fun experience, but comfortable. And that is the heart of a super saloon right there. Comfortable, elegant, refined, practical, but guess what? There's a beast that lies within, and you're gonna have a hell of a fun time once you unleash that beast. Before we get in the Ferrari, I wanna make one point. If it's your first time driving an E34 M5 and a Ferrari, and you were to drive the E34 M5 to your limit and drive the Ferrari to your limit, right? Meaning you just pushed them, you tried to push the car for everything they got, right? Your limit, the car's limit. In the E34, you're gonna have a fun, rewarding time. In the Ferrari, you're probably gonna kill yourself. And we will touch on that when we hop into the Ferrari. Now, I asked AI on Google about the Ferrari, the type of car, and what the experience is. The Ferrari 348 was designed for people who enjoy quick, aggressive driving and appreciate the capabilities of a benchmark machine. All right, that's pretty fair. I like that. So getting in the 348, you're immediately welcomed with pretty much a go-kart feeling car. It feels like you basically just got into a big old go-kart. I mean, the no power steering feels absolutely insane. This is the best feeling car I've ever driven. The M5 has a tendency, as the car and driver said, to feel a little dull and numb, and that really is just, I mean, that's a performance sedan, right? I mean, it's got to have some comfort. You got the steering box, so that kind of takes away from it. So, the M5, the steering feedback's not really, that's probably the one downfall of the car. I don't mind it, but the feedback is not the best. Whereas this thing, I mean, instant feedback no matter what. The key attribute of this Ferrari is the no power steering. Direct, insanely it feels planted, it's fun. It's obviously a little hard at low speeds, but it's well worth it. Otherwise, getting in this car, I mean, it's a car, right? Like it's not, when you're just casually cruising it, nothing about it feels, overly jarring or super uncomfortable. It's not anywhere near the M5, but it's not a bad car to cruise around town. I mean, the clutch is pretty heavy, the shifting and the way it kind of hits its gears, a little clunky, not clunky, just direct. And it says, the AI said, an aggressive driving experience. It really is. It is like, seeing as there's no drive shaft or much rubber that's kind of bracing the drivetrain, when you're shifting this car, and you let off that clutch, like you're getting punched in the back. Like, I mean, it's all right here, and it's all very well connected. I mean, you feel it. It is not an easy car to drive smooth, I guess you could say. It takes kind of a lot of finesse to get it comfortable, or to keep it comfortable. That's the one thing I will say about the Ferrari. But that's not what it's for. It's for fun. And let me tell you, when you're ready to have fun, the car is ready too. And the noise, like I said earlier, it's hard to compete with a Ferrari V8. The feeling of wringing this car out is so rewarding and so fun and raw. I mean, it is like nothing else I've ever driven. The M5 is very quiet, calm, elegant, if you will. This thing is like, it's like you just got into a race car. And the power is there. I mean, it feels fun. I honestly, back to back, I don't think this car feels as fast as the M5. I'm gonna be dead honest with you guys. Now we'll find that out just in a second here when we get Eustace over here and we take these things out for a spin. But off the rip, this doesn't have the power that the M5 feels like. The torque on this, not like the M5. This feels quick, but it doesn't feel like straight line fast, if you will. But this isn't about straight line driving fast. This is about corners and feeling the road and kind of being one with the car. I mean, this car kind of feels like an extension of yourself in a way. Whereas the M5, it feels like you're sheltered from the road that you're, tearing up. Like, you could drive both the cars the exact same way. The Ferrari feels like you're out there with it. The M5 feels like you're in kind of a comfortable cloud. The suspension on this car is stiff. The M5 is like clouds compared. You feel every bump in this car. You feel every dip in the road. You're locked in, right? It is literally like a go-kart. And remember what I said earlier about driving the M5 at it and yours limit, and then taking the 348 and driving the same way and you'll kill yourself? This is, without a doubt, one of the hardest cars I've ever driven. This car, being a unassisted mid-engine exotic sports car of the 80s and 90s, there's nothing to save you. If you don't maintain throttle in the corner and you have snap oversteer, or the fact that it likes to understeer, if you drive this car to the limit's gonna find you before you find it. These are kind of feel like a death trap. I have had quite a few situations in this car, whether it be flooring it and then slamming on the brakes where the rear end just wants to kick up and I lose all my grip, or whatever the matter is. This is not an easy car to drive. A BMW and an M5 in particular is a very easy, comfortable car to drive, and it's easy and comfortable to drive at its absolute limit. This car, you got to work for it, and it's rewarding when you kind of get it figured out, but it's not easy. When you kind of get the feel for it, it's like nothing else. But until you get there, and I'm honestly not even all the way there, you have to respect the car. That is the one takeaway I've had between the M5 and this Ferrari in my ownership. You have to respect this Ferrari or you will get hurt. It's not a lot of power, but it is intense power, and it demands that you are on top of things when you drive it. It is a direct car. It's like a race car on the road, whereas the M5 is kind of like a comfort car that just got infused with a race car, like that's the difference between the two. So that's the quick driving. Now let's get to the part that we all want to see. Hey, that was a lot closer. So the passenger's making that much of a difference. There we have it. The head-to-head is complete. I am absolutely mind blown by those results. These two cars, they're like dead even, to the point where, and hopefully I labeled it well in the video, half the races, M5 walked away from the Ferrari. When the passenger and the cameraman switched over, the Ferrari won. They are that close to where one passenger is setting off the complete car, the complete race. And, you know, we try to keep it as concise and as, strict as we could. We didn't want to have too many different factors. We tried to keep the variables low. So, I mean, we did multiple races from second gear high in the revs to help the Ferrari, because the Ferrari's power is all up top. So in most cases, again, not with the passenger, the M5 can beat the Ferrari from a lower rev in the same gear simply because there's more lower end power with this car. But once you're high up in the revs and you're in the Ferrari's power band, kind of good luck. And the weight made all the difference. I mean, dead even cars, same driving, same everything. And when the passenger went from here to here, the Ferrari started to win. I mean, it was insane. I was almost dead sure that we were gonna have an M5 victory every time, and it was just gonna be the funniest thing ever. But I have to say, the Ferrari held its own. And I've touched on it multiple times. You have an understated four-door car, and guess what it's doing? Keeping up and even sometimes beating the exotic sports car. And that is the specialness of a BMW M5. I wanted to kind of put some numbers to it to make sense of this. So drag racing rule of thumb is that 100 pounds is about 10 horsepower, okay? These cars, no passenger, have about 500 pounds between them, which means the Ferrari in weight terms has about a 50 horsepower advantage on the M5. With the passenger in the M5, the Ferrari has about almost a 70 horsepower difference. I know obviously we're not adding horsepower, but just that weight alone means that this S38 in this car has to cover about 700 more pounds with that extra passenger. So for it to even do what it does, regardless of where the passenger is downright impressive, because this engine's hauling a lot more car than this. And I haven't touched on enough in this video. This is a 3.8 Euro version M5. The 3.6, I don't think would even compare to the Ferrari. That extra horsepower you get out of 3.8 is very important. And there we have it. The 348 Ferrari versus the E34 M5 BMW. A head-to-head in every way that I could think of. Two beautiful, impressive, and just all-around amazing cars in their own way. If I had to kind of put an idea in my head now in this year of 2024, what these cars meant for the brands back in 1989, 1990, I would say this was Ferrari's last chance at holding on to the 80s, right? I think Ferrari was kind of holding on to what it was for the last couple years, couple decades. And I think this was BMW's leap ahead in revolutionizing what we think of when we think of four-door super saloons, four-door fast cars, because this was just an absolute icon that said, you know what, we're gonna prove to the world that a four-door car that's practical and comfortable can also compete with an exotic sports car. And this car does that just perfectly. It is the emulation of absolutely everything I think you really want from a car. This is the emulation of I want to get behind the wheel and basically drive a go-kart on the street. I want to drive like a maniac. I want to have fun. I want to feel connected to the road. And it does that absolutely well. That leaves us with one question. If I can only take one home, which one am I taking home? Well,